that they've heard great things about what this group is doing. They're very supportive, and then I'm going to just send invites out to them to attend a future meeting, just so they can introduce themselves for those that don't know them well, and then also hopefully they'll stick around and listen and participate as well. So, but I just want to give everybody that positive review that, even though they're new to being on council, they've definitely heard about our process, they've been following it, and they're very appreciative of everybody's effort. So, correct, but recently elected. With that, wanted to make a change to the agenda, but I think one hopefully everybody will be positive about, that we originally just said we were going to do housing and transportation tonight, but I think we're going to make really good time tonight. So I wanted to just review the agenda and say, just make the addendum that we, because right now it says review strategies, housing and transportation. I would like to say, and others that we need to have time to do. That works for those. So I have a second. Any objection?
Sorry, who motion?
Yeah, we need a motion, sorry. Nicole, and then Keisha will second. Any objections? Perfect, small change. We're good. That'll allow us to be able to do some other pieces of the pie, so that way our next meeting can be more efficient. So then with that, staff sent around the November 17th SAC meeting notes. That's why it feels like we haven't seen each other in a while. So are there any changes, additions, or edits? No, I have a motion to approve. Cole? I'll second. Kevin will second. Any objections? No. Okay, great. So with that, we can now dive into the draft region plan strategies. Mark will kind of just once again give us an overview of what we're going to do. And then we will dive right into the housing and transportation piece.
Sounds good. Can everybody see this slide? I could have made it a little bigger. I'll do that next time. So I just want to kind of recap where we've been, where we're headed each time. So we're all on the same page. So again, over the last, now it's almost been a year since we got together and started this process. You've been hearing from various county departments about what some of the issues are, where some of the opportunities are, and issues that we can address then here with this Region 2 plan. We've had in those SAC meetings where you've heard those presentations, you all have had an opportunity to discuss some of those issues. Office of Planning and Zoning has been conducting stakeholder interviews with various organizations within Region 2. And then we've had several public comment periods. We've had a feedback map. We had a general basic needs questionnaire. We also had a visioning questionnaire. So throughout that whole process, we've been gathering information, and that's how we've then developed these strategies that you all then reviewed over these past 2 weeks. So this is our first meeting tonight where we'll talk about housing and transportation. And then, like Joe said, maybe we can tackle some more strategies this evening. You do have you have 5 other surveys that you'll need to take on various other topics, ending, I think it's next Friday morning. And we'll work through those strategies again over the next 4 or so meetings over the next 2 months, in January and February. Then once the SAC has an opportunity to review these strategies and again have consensus on them, we'll shop these draft strategies out to the public. They'll have an opportunity to review them. We'll bring those comments back to you all, the SAC, talk about those comments, see if we need to make any tweaks then to those strategies. Then that will help inform our preliminary draft. And again, the preliminary draft will be comprised of the draft strategies, as well as then the mapping, which we'll get to at the beginning of March or starting in March. That'll go out to the public. They'll have an opportunity to review these strategies again. And then we'll come back to you all with those comments. So you'll have another crack at again, listening to what the public said on those strategies, tweak it some more, and then it'll go to the plan. Then it'll go to the legislative phase through the Planning Advisory Board and County Council. And we've got some draft dates up there. Okay, once we get through the summer and into the fall. Look at those as anticipated dates. Again, depending upon public comment periods, how much time you all need to review these draft strategies. We may need more time, we'll see. But again, those are just some rough time periods. And yeah, you all have that in that Excel spreadsheet calendar that I gave you. Okay. I do want to note that as we start going through these strategies and also through the mapping exercise, if you do have any concerns about any of your fellow SAC members regarding ethics, OPZ is not the arbiter in this situation. You're to contact the ethics, Board of Ethics. And I've provided Gina's contact information there for you to reach out. Okay.
Yeah, the ethic, just Nicole has to just make sure everybody turned in their ethics forms.
Yeah, so it is not mandatory. It's not required that you do so. It just allows the ethics Board of Ethics Committee to acknowledge if there are any conflicts of interest, so that if a complaint is lodged, it's on record. Okay. All right. So again, the goal for tonight, we have.
All right, can I get an answer to that question? Yes or no? Did everybody turn theirs in or not?
No.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So again, the goal tonight is to get consensus on draft strategies that had already not received consensus then through the survey that you previously took over these past 2 weeks. Okay, so like I said, is where we are here today is we're trying to get these strategies to the point where they're ready for public review. So you all have reviewed the draft strategies. A quorum was reached with responses, and we reached consensus on all but 4 strategies between transportation and housing. That's why Joe said we might have some additional time tonight to now get into the next set of strategies. So again, just to recap, we wanted to talk about strategies that didn't receive that 2/3 majority noted in your charter, or that didn't essentially reach so items that had 2/3 of stop and hold or didn't reach a 2/3 majority we're going to talk about tonight. And I've included the statistics for those strategies we're going to talk about as well. So the way we're going to do this, I'm going to pop up on the screen here those strategies that didn't have consensus. I've listed out again the statistics where just the numbers, not people's names and how they voted. The comments that we received for those strategies, those constructive comments. So we'll go through those comments, discuss any concerns. We can talk about reworking the strategy. We can delete it altogether, or if you all need some more information, we can certainly talk about what information is needed, and then we'll get it to you prior to the next meeting, and we can talk about it again at January 19th meeting. But again, ultimately, we want to get to consensus on this new wording, or like I said, if we just need more time, we can do that at the next meeting. So folks did leave comments on strategies that we're not going to be reviewing tonight. So we will send out a document early next week identifying what those comments were. Some people had questions, some people wanted clarification on certain terms or how we might address it. So we'll provide a summary of those responses to those comments early next week, just so that you have that for your information. Okay. Okay, so I do just want to, this is your draft vision statement. Again, just want to make sure that as we're working through this, there is that hierarchy of all these strategies should be aligning or implementing to some degree this draft vision statement. Again, you all did a great job last time we met on coming together on this super quickly. So again, just want to pop this up here. Tonight, we're going to be talking about housing and transportation. So again, the key points in here are available and accessible transportation systems. And we did have something in here about diverse, full spectrum of attractive and diverse housing, including affordable options and mixed use properties. Okay. So again, as we're going through this, just making sure that really just these next 2 strategies that we're going to talk about for housing are implementing that. Okay, So the first strategy where we didn't get consensus was develop and implement design guidelines to ensure new missing middle forms are compatible with surrounding existing neighborhoods. And again, just to recap what missing middle housing is, typically you might just see your single family home, typical conventional subdivisions with single family homes, or you might have apartment buildings. And they're servicing really two different types of populations. And we're sort of missing this middle housing or different types of density that can be that other folks can afford and have it be compatible with some of these other existing neighborhoods. So you might have duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, courtyards, cottage homes, townhomes. We have here in Region 2 and some other multifamily units. So again, just to sort of identify that there are these other different types of or housing types that can be affordable to a greater variety of incomes and more of the population here within Region 2. So I've listed out the comments there that we received on this strategy. And then I provided here at the bottom, again, just some background information, maybe to assist with your discussion tonight.
Yeah, I can't even begin to see those percentages.
Yeah, okay, so the way it broke down was needs more discussion, was about 40% or 5 people. And then it was I can live with it, 15% and 2 people, and I like it 45%, 6 people. So majority were good with it, but we didn't reach that 67% threshold. And so again, I think we could just open up the floor if folks want to talk about what some of the concerns with this strategy were. And again, ultimately, if we can get to consensus on this strategy.
Question I have, just because I don't have knowledge in it, if someone could help explain what an architectural review would be versus a design guideline.
Yeah, so a design guideline could be anything from anything from the whole sort of building envelope, and then your architectural standards could be looking at the surrounding characters architecture and trying to match that.
Well, design guidelines aren't always about just architecture. They can be about the whole development and site.
Right.
That's what was a little confusing about it, because it's about surrounding existing neighborhoods.
Okay. So
And also, I think design guidelines historically have been pretty detailed, lengthy documents that, if we're thinking about maybe streamlining the process or trying to make it easier to get missing middle housing in, it might just be a additional challenge. Maybe there's an easier way to do it than a whole.
okay.
Does a design guideline like help with uniformity of like a community? Is that what that means? Okay. So you're saying that that's challenging as a developer to create housing that would fit and meet those guidelines for the neighborhoods you're already developing, to create missing middle and include that?
Can I take a slide with that? Christina from OPZ. Yes. So one of the things that is envisioned for missing middle is that it's not necessarily going to be all new development, that this could happen in existing neighborhoods. And that's where it starts to get sticky. Because now I live in a crazy little eclectic neighborhood that was developed from the 1940s into the 70s and 80s. There is a wide variety of housing in my own neighborhood. However, we had an infill lot get developed recently with a very, very modern house that's black. It has a flat roof, like it is completely different than anything in the neighborhood. So when you talk about potentially a design guideline or some kind of architectural language, you are trying to fit something new into an existing community. And you don't want it necessarily sticking out like a sore thumb. Now, how bad is it that we have this one crazy house in our neighborhood that doesn't really fit all the others? I don't know, in the grand scheme of things, because I'm more permissive, right? I want housing for other people. It doesn't bother me that much, but I know it bothers other people in my neighborhood. One of the things about the missing middle that I think, when I think, okay, we want to look at maybe areas that are appropriate for missing middle, where you want to be able to layer it into existing single family homes. And I'm not talking about a home that maybe got built in the last 10 years. I'm talking older communities, right? Where you may have higher density already, maybe you're pretty close to transit, etc. I don't know that all the forms, this is the full menu of missing middle. I don't know that every one of those forms is entirely appropriate, but I think you all have a strategy up at the top about identifying challenges of constructing missing middle housing as redevelopment and infill, including code requirements. I mean, and I'm kind of going back a little bit beyond design guidelines. I think one thing I may want to suggest is evaluating what types of missing middle would be appropriate as infill. Because I don't know that everything in that line that's in yellow is going to be right in an existing neighborhood. And then, I don't know, I have been reading Dan's book, because I have it, because I went to see him when he was here. And I think a lot of what really would control, and the way our zoning ordinance is written, is I don't know that you necessarily want another set, like a design guidelines, because we don't do those very well in Anne Arundel County. You may simply want that it's not necessarily permitted by right, that it is a conditional use, and that you have certain requirements that must be met in order to do it. That might be a better way to go at it. But I don't think you have to say that's the way to do it. You could say evaluate, consider, to determine the right forms and compatibility with the neighborhood. Because we're at a plan level here. So I don't know that we have to go down into that really granular language.
Yeah, I would say that architectural design guidelines are notoriously difficult. I mean, what do you say, how do you define good architecture? It's almost like, was some Supreme Court judge said about a different case, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. It's the same thing with bad architecture, inappropriate architecture. I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it, like that inappropriate house in your neighborhood. So I'm not sure if it's it's something that we should be asking anyone to do, to implement design guidelines. I mean, I guess you could talk about roof pitches, you can talk about appropriate colors.
Something I would permit in russet, or, it's not something I would necessarily permit in Jessup, just because of the difference in the communities.
Right.
It's not something I would permit in Suburban Park, just because they're all different in what they are. It's something I would not permit in Crofton, in Piney Orchard. They're all different communities in what the density is, and what the community is, and what the amenities are, and what have you. So I think it would have to be something that would be a case by case in development by development. Watershed is very different than Russet, is very different than Maryland City, is very different than Jessup. And even within Jessup, you have very, very different communities just on the same road.
That's the point of the market, right? The market should probably dictate.
I
My
think it
problem,
should be development by development.
right, one of my problems,
was trying to
it's
say.
another impediment. I mean, I hear infill, we all want infill,
Mhm.
and it's another impediment to making that work, potentially, if it's dictated. And then it gives somebody else the opportunity to weigh in on something that with the county that might go beyond their reach.
I think you can actually change this to simply say, ensure new missing middle forms are compatible with surrounding existing neighborhoods. Because it is the form, right? If houses are a certain size in the neighborhood, you don't want the missing middle form that comes in, that's either a duplex or a triplex, to be so much significantly bigger that it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Or just so it's so egregious that the neighborhood's gonna oust you or be so against the development that they don't want it.
Yeah.
Would there be maybe some type of tax incentive? Or
That's further down. I think that that's one of the ones.
okay, I'll
There
never
were
get to
other
that.
questions
Okay.
related to that, but I think.
No, I was just, you know, you could say, hey, if you do this,
certain incentives.
yeah, certain
That
incentives.
was one of the questions in here, wasn't it?
So if you offer an incentive, then you're sort of losing some of the ability to ensure that it's compatible with the neighborhood, because if they don't need the incentive, then there's no need to ensure compatibility, right?
No.
So,
I don't think it was that kind of incentive.
yeah,
Just a point of clarification, Martin, so. If you had made a recommendation, we would, so is the idea that we would need to make that recommendation and then we need to have a motion in a second?
Mhm.
Okay, that's the process, so.
yeah, or you can just take a temperature check and see if anybody has concerns, it doesn't need to necessarily be so formal, because
Okay, that's. what I was-
there are so many more steps after this.
Okay,
Yeah,
the no, we need to be that formal with it,
Yep.
or we just kind of like, we all agree to. I'm making this up, getting rid of the word develop, just for fun,
yeah,
but we all just kind of, we don't need to like motion it. Vote on it.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
so is it really just say, starting with ensure new missing middle forms are compatible and so on?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think if you do that, it gives us enough direction.
Yeah.
Because remember. Like implementing design guidelines, they're gonna have to get developed, they're gonna have to get approved. But we might not even be able to get them approved, quite frankly. So. I think you wanna have it a little more open-ended so that we can do something that I think will be implementable. And by implementable, I mean either put in the code. So that we now can have this kind of housing be constructed more easily.
Is that part of the red tape that holds you up?
Or design guideline.
No, well, just being able to do the thing though, for instance, but I don't know that it's a great question for you. Yeah.
And I wish Mark was.
Well, that's.
It's a whole different impediment to you being able to develop a significant.
I'm talking from an architect's perspective,
Oh.
so, no, no, I just agree with the change, saying that I don't see how we can implement a design guideline to ensure this. I think it has to just be part of the review
Yeah.
process.
I agree. I think it's maybe a little bit of cart ahead of the horse, right? And I think to your point, Christina, having some flexibility best. And maybe it's not necessarily designed out, it could be another vehicle to accomplish compatibility, but
Mhm.
determining what the vehicle is for compatibility now might be able to. So leaving that flexibility is probably the best approach.
And I should not have said that it wouldn't be good to ask you, because really. We could say, look, would you do a stacked duplex in a single family development? And a stacked duplex could look very similar to all the single family homes next to it, but it's housing two families. So. The thing is, we want to try and make that happen.
It seems that I think we all agree, unless sorry, just in case I didn't hear. Okay, excellent. So our agreement then is to eliminate the words develop and implement design guidelines 2, and instead just have it start with ensuring the missing middle forms are compatible with surrounding existing neighborhoods. Okay,
Sounds good.
all right, we have consensus.
Okay. Okay, the next strategy is continue and expand boutique tenant-based rental assistance programs to help fill the gap in the limited availability of existing housing choice vouchers. 5 folks said needs more discussion. 1 said disagree but trust the group. 4 said I can live with it, and 2 said I like it. Now, I'll start off by saying boutique. I get it. I think that probably turned a lot of folks off. So I spoke with Erin Karpowitz at ACDS, and she's been here before and presented on affordable housing. And she offered up down below there in bold italics. Something just very similar. I think it was actually just taking out the word boutique, but continue and expand tenant-based rental assistance programs that complement existing housing choice vouchers, because they currently do that, and there are some additional programs that they use. But just taking out the word boutique.
So what is tenant-based rental assistance? Okay, so it's tenant by tenant, specific.
Okay, so tenant base would be providing resources to the individual to avoid
Mhm.
rent on the private market.
Okay.
Whereas the other side would be this supply base, which would be providing the affordable housing.
Here's the building that you live in it versus here's the subsidy to help you.
So, yeah.
And so what was boutique meant to imply?
Yeah, Spencer,
I think it was meant to imply these other programs that ACDS runs, so, or it could be a program that a nonprofit runs, something along the lines of that, providing funding for someone to rent.
Okay, so boutique implying small and.
Yes, small, independent, unique. maybe
and not publicly.
targeted, yeah, and not necessarily public.
Well, when she came, didn't she say that the one program to like rehab the houses or what have you only does so many per year?
Yep.
And it wasn't, like. Right,
They don't have the resource.
correct.
Right.
And then didn't she also say, like, when, like, I did Medicaid for 5 years and there was like a wait list every year.
Mhm.
So. Like, I personally chose needs more discussion because every time I tried to get one of my families on that wait list, it was impossible.
Mhm.
Impossible. For 5 years, I never once got a Medicaid eligible, so that's a certain percent of the poverty level, which every one of these programs we're talking about, they would qualify for. In 5 years, I got no families on that list.
Because there wasn't space.
Correct.
Yeah.
So. How is this possible? And I did this in 5 counties, by the way, Anne Arundel, Montgomery, Howard, and PG. So in 5 years, if I got 0 families in 5 counties that were completely eligible, especially in Anne Arundel, right? So we're supposed to be one of the better ones. In 5 years, I got 0 families that were
Right.
completely eligible in any one of these boutique programs. Tell me how.
And
Well, that's why it's.
That's-
Yeah.
Right,
So-
that's,
So, see if we could bottom to continue and expand these programs that complement the existing.
And
housing choice.
these strategies are to help leverage needs of other departments. So if a strategy like this is in the Region 2 plan and a council member picks it up and there are opportunities to expand the program, this region plan has been publicly vetted, right? We've gotten input from the public. It's been reviewed by you all. These are legitimate then strategies that can help our decision makers then work towards expanding these types of programs.
Well,
Okay.
yeah,
That's,
Okay, so
We're just saying-
proposing this to county council to find funding for the center, to
Correct.
potentially fund this.
Yeah, we're saying this is a-
First, we're saying, please adopt this.
Yeah.
Then, once it's adopted and it's in the plan, we're saying, okay, county council, this is important for implementation. You do need to find additional funding sources.
What about, I guess there are ideas on what resistance we may get from some people who may not want to accept housing choice vouchers? Or in some situations, like, if we make these available
Mhm.
or, you know, or try to expand more housing choice vouchers, some landlords don't want to take.
You're banned from checking the source of income.
Oh, I know,
And
I just know that people get around it other ways.
so I would say so that we don't have an influence on the housing choice voucher program because that's federally funded, and that's kind of what this strategy is trying to get at.
Okay,
Expanding these other things that we do have influence over.
all right.
And they might not be in the form of a voucher per se that has that stigma. They might be in the form of a, financial grants, something along those lines.
Stipend, yeah.
Exactly, like the programs at ACPS. Those are valid issues, but just, we can't really.
So Mark, it looks like it's the fold all the way at the bottom. Of the
Correct.
as recommended. So continue and expand tenant-based rental assistance programs. Complement existing housing choice vouchers.
Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to that language instead.
Okay,
Yeah, I understand what we're talking about now, so.
Right.
I think focus on rental, not renting to or getting people or increasing homeownership.
so we do have additional strategies that do talk about that. And again, these strategies that we're talking about here are to go a little bit deeper or more specific, or based on the Region 2 geography rather than Plan 2040. So if it's already in Plan 2040, it applies here. This is our opportunity to identify specific areas or strategies that aren't already identified in Plan 2040. So.
I have one question.
Yep.
Do you want to add federal in there that complement existing federal housing choice vouchers?
Not a bad idea. I mean, I think for the
Yeah.
public.
I think for the public.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, I know that because I worked in affordable housing, but you're right. I think most people-
I
So-
know that because it just turned 2 minutes ago.
I know,
Yeah.
I did too, but that made me think, not if, when we're talking about complementing, yeah, okay, this is an add-on to a federal program that we're gonna try and do locally,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. That's fine.
So complement existing federal.
Federal.
Yeah.
housing choice vouchers.
Okay.
Okay, Spencer, does the state
There-
have programs?
Some states have voucher programs, but
Do we?
I'm not sure if one does. Counties have some thing around.
Existing, maybe federal plus municipal or local.
Federal. Yeah.
Federal and local.
Federal.
Would the group allow us to do a little research to figure out exactly what that language should be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's state.
Yeah, if state/local applies, then add it.
Okay,
Yeah.
we will come back to you at the next meeting on that specific wording, whether it's just going to be federal housing or federal and state.
Yeah.
Everybody's-
Find out where these vouchers come from.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Great. So then we did have at the end of the survey, an opportunity for everyone to provide additional comments on strategies that or issues that you've heard about over the past 10 or 12 months and strategies that might address those issues. So here are the comments that we received. And I think at this point, I'd like to just open it up to the folks that may have provided these comments, if you want to jump in and note your comment and we can discuss it. If you have a specific strategy or wording for a strategy, we can chat about that. Or again, like I said, if you just want to have a discussion and then OPZ over the next 2 weeks, we can develop something and again, bring it back to you January 19th. So.
I'll talk about my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One down, walkable communities. All right, we talked about those. I think they're a very high priority. There's not a word about them in any of these points. And I think we need to add that we need to encourage.
Yep.
What I say?
Walkable communities.
Yeah, encourage the development of affordable, walkable communities in these, missing middle, affordable, all these different strategies we're talking about. We need to encourage walkable communities.
So something like that might be identified under our transportation strategies, where we would talk about then providing sidewalks or bicycle facilities.
There was a question in one of the
Yeah.
transportation. things about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but transportation talked about through routes and for instance, the walking paths, it talked about, being able to walk from here to Annapolis and all that stuff. I'm talking about just within a small area, be able to walk within your community. If I know what I do with my students, there's the walk score.
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody's tried that. So I put my address in the walk score and I got a score of 4. 4 out of 100.
Mhm.
And it's horrendous. Annapolis has, downtown Annapolis has a score of 97. And our part of the community is just, we don't have any walkable communities. Russet to an extent is. But even there, they're lacking. And I want all these new communities that we're talking about to emphasize walkability.
One of the issues with Russ is 198. Now they can do an overpass.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can walk within Russet, but you can't get to the amenities just outside of Russet without taking your life in your hands. Yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about commercial
Communities.
commercial spaces within residential neighborhoods, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about being able to walk from place to place without taking your life in your hands, like crossing 198. I'm not sure if pedestrian bridge is enough, it might be too little too late, and that's why I emphasize new communities. But the ability to walk to your school, to walk
Yeah.
to your driveway.
So we do
walk
have
to-
safe routes to schools
Exactly.
is a program to help fill those gaps, but
You don't have to be in the community, but accessible to the community.
so let's go.
So if we go, so I guess the question, Mark, is, are we allowed to add? Or just right up?
You can, I'm thinking, I'm guessing that we already have a strategy like that in Plan 2040, or even in the strategies that we reviewed over the past couple of weeks. So I got your point. Let me comb through our strategies and I'll circle back January 19th for walkable. And at that point, if again, I'll probably have a couple items that list out how to fill those gaps or make communities more walkable. And if there is still something that needs to be said to address that issue, we can talk about what that strategy would look like, what that wording for a new strategy would look like. Okay. Okay.
I can talk about, my bullet, I'll be the longest there at the end, but I think, the key point there, I think, was just big picture, APF in general. A lot of what we're trying to focus on is how do we grow and develop county for more housing choice. But the key issue, and we found it pretty interesting in the school meeting, with the former planning and zoning director, was that really a lot of the school overcrowding is generated from existing housing stock. But moreover, if we're planning new development, whether it's missing middle, affordable, or whatever you want to call it, it's still subject to the same school APF restrictions. So if the schools are constrained and closed, we can't really build anything other than 55 plus. So the note there is really that we understand there's a school work group that was formed with council members and other stakeholders. I think they're doing good work, and that's what was mentioned in one of our meetings. So I don't necessarily have a recommendation to solve it, other than to highlight that whatever that group's working on should be followed through on, because otherwise we could potentially have a plan that's encouraging growth and development that can't actually be implemented because it's held up by schools and roads and other API.
And you saw that I called them out on some
Oh, yeah.
inaccurate information.
It was very enlightening. I thought it was really good discussion for all of us to hear. Particularly the efforts that we're trying to undergo here as a group, because we want to drive and direct growth where it needs to be, but with issues like that, I know we can't build anything, you know.
Right, and if one school, like if he's gonna close down the entire Mead cluster because of the whole MacArthur issue, which is bullcrap, which I have been saying for the entire 20 years I've lived here.
Right.
That's bull. Like, there's got to be a way, like I have lived here, I've been a part of that for as long as I've lived here.
Your recommendation with moving the gate, I thought was a great one. It seems like,
What fix?
it seems like a very tactical recommendation. Yeah.
And every time I say I keep thinking, look at.
And you're gonna close the entire cluster because you meet middle. And they just gave however many millions of dollars to meet high. And you didn't add any capacity. We gave it a facelift. You know what I'm saying? Like, can you even get me something? I mean, this has been the bane of our existence.
Well, it's a sensitive subject, but it's such a key issue in all of it.
And you waited how long to build a watershed? As long as 18 years I've lived in Russet.
Right, and that's after we put an 18-room addition on the high school, right? It takes that long to get through the process.
I mean, it's just insane.
So,
And you had to build the other lane
Right.
on 198 that does nothing but further clog up traffic a half a mile down the road.
So in our healthy communities survey, we have something about the schools work group.
Okay.
And we have a recommendation about moving the gate for better access. So
I mean, it's stupid, and it's not just that, so they're building Old Mill across the street from the canine department, so I'm
Mhm.
equally invested in that, which is next to Spalding.
Yeah.
So you have two schools that are gonna get out at the same time every day with a 2-lane road and 1 traffic light, which is right next to what? I-97. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is, nobody thought that.
So-
You want me to add, Mark kind of, he told me what you all would be working on, and I did a little bit of additional research, so. I did talk to Christine Duval, who has been, had been working with the former director very closely on the school APF. And I think the question for the group is, do you want to make any other recommendations related to APF? And I looked at what some of the things were that they had on the table, and you may want to make some broad recommendations. For instance, to consider increasing school utilization percentages in APF. I don't know if you've already made the recommendation on increasing the number of workforce or affordable housing units that could be exempted under APF, but that's one. And then another is when a school is actually closed, but the school that's next door is open, whether or not you can look at like averaging the capacity, something to that extent. And I would couch this in consider. Not like your issue on moving the gate is, yeah, let's move the gate. That's a definite recommendation. But these, because you do have a work group, and hopefully under a new director, the work group is going to move forward. I don't know if they are or not. I mean, we are in a little bit of a holding pattern, which is why I'm thinking if you would like to add something to just enforce that this is super important, I would say consider doing something. This is the latest school, yeah.
They're closed. Needs closed. They're closing them. And Julie Hummer is the priority.
Yeah, and she served on the school board, and now that she's a county councilwoman, this is excellent. But like some of these schools are on base, so the elementary schools that are on base, you can't do anything about that. Like you can't bus those kids off, you can't do anything about that.
And right,
But
so
I
right
think that'd be a
now,
good idea if you look at that cluster of elementary schools.
right,
If you look at them in the aggregate and say, overall, if you add the capacity together and you add the enrollment together, there should be some openings there, so the schools outside the base shouldn't be penalized for schools
Correct.
inside the base.
Because you can't do anything about that. There's nothing we can do about that.
yeah, so I don't know, I mean, maybe some kind of recommendation about doing an average of capacity within a feeder district. I mean, that's kind of a way out there recommendation, but at least let's start thinking out of the box a little bit.
But we can't take our eyes off the reason for these rules is to prevent school crowding. So, I mean, when we average these things and say, oh, okay. The average of the elementary schools in the need feeder system is under capacity. But they're building housing outside base, not inside base. So that means Jessup Elementary is going to be packed to the gills, and more so. Because it won't be overall filled until Jessup is at 120%. And then some of these elementary schools on base are at 80%.
Well, the reason the base isn't, their schools aren't, the reason the base isn't having crowding at their schools anymore is because the base has turned civilian. it's not an active duty base anymore.
Right.
And that's the issue.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and these aren't DoD schools, these are AACPS schools. And so to allow non-DoD kids to come to those schools is what needs to happen, and that's a DoD AACPS conversation that absolutely needs to happen. That base is going more and more civilian. And so that's a conversation that absolutely needs to happen between DoD and AACPS.
Yeah.
Because that base is going more and more civilian, you're having less and less active duty, and so there's less and less active duty capacity that's needed for those schools.
Maybe to Christina's point, it's like, we can look into the concept of averaging, not necessarily. I hear your concern about packing a school with skills, but there's parts of APM testing that would preclude a single developer to come in and put 1,000 homes in when there's only one seat available, right?
There's no need for 4 elementary schools on base.
Right.
They're not even full.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that the Board of Ed has been very slow at doing redistricting because it's a very, very painful process. You know, people are like, I bought this house because my children are gonna go to these schools. I don't wanna change that.
But
So
that
it
doesn't
is,
apply for me.
I get it, but it does happen in the rest of the county. If there is capacity at adjacent schools, and I know we're saying Fort Meade in and of itself is its own problem, but the Board of Ed has to redistrict to bring balance to the capacity at each of the schools on a more frequent basis.
And they just started a work group for that.
Yeah,
So that needs to be, I mean, all of these things need to be brought up now. There's no reason for 4 elementary schools on base. There's absolutely not. The ECC, the Early Childhood Center, absolutely needs to stay on base to serve the DoD kid, or early childhood kids. But the other 3, there's not enough capacity for that.
well, yeah, because the utilization chart that I just downloaded, one of them, Manor View Elementary, you know, it's only at 54% capacity.
And those
You know,
kids can go
whereas-
to hell.
Now, Maryland City is at 110%,
It just said this word,
84.
80.
And it-
Projected
84.
okay, because it's new.
Well, look at the bill 920. But those are also the projections for 3 years from now. Right.
But then you have Van Bachman and Christian Hill. 80%. You know, which are right outside.
Yeah, Van Bachman is showing at 68%.
Everything's running the barrel.
And Monarch is at 100% as well. And they're not listed on there.
So the question is, do you all want to make a more detailed school or some kind of school APF recommendation?
Yes.
Yes.
We do have a recommendation talking about redistricting the schools.
Yeah, and again, we do talk about schools in the Healthy Communities survey, so which is available for you all to take right now. So we can table this discussion until we go through all those strategies that are presented. You know, this is obviously related to housing. They're complementary here, so
Yeah.
we can continue with that discussion or wait until we're actually focused on the school topic to see the other strategies that we're trying to address.
I think that would be good, just because this is a really good comment, and we come back to it.
Yeah, I definitely would like to make some more specific.
And in the meantime, we can come back with some more information and again, go through Plan 2040, show you what's already been identified. And maybe where some of those guys. Mhm.
And moving the gate will definitely be one of those recommendations.
It'll be there with shovel, right?
I'm serious. What's a quick move? Was that big mark?
This is still number 113-21.
So what is the,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I know we're trying to move on. What is the choke point right now for development? Is the middle school numbers?
In that chart right now, the entire media cluster is shut because the high school. is closed.
Because so it's the high school.
Yeah, so it's a hierarchy, right? You have multiple
Yeah.
elementary, a few middle, and then
Yeah.
one high school. So if that high school is closed, it doesn't matter how open all the other schools are because you're
Right.
closed at the high school level.
But they're building a new high school. Right?
Not here,
Whether, so
Old Mill.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, so
But they're like
theoretically,
districts.
what should happen when they build a new school is that the Board of Ed should redistrict
Yep.
to address the capacity change in the school. So
Right.
I think there's some hope that just by virtue of that school being built and that redistricting taking place, that would alleviate some of the overcrowding and need that closes it. But
I mean, building one new school in the county isn't meant for one community, it's meant to help the whole county. So.
It goes to Christina's point about sort of like averaging things out. And
Mhm.
you've got excess capacity somewhere and you don't somewhere else. Maybe there's a mechanism we could at least make a recommendation.
Adjacent, not like.
Adjacent.
Yeah.
No, because when Grafton High School got built, it didn't help the overcrowding at Mead one bit, because you thought that Arundel would loosen up and then it would trickle over, but it didn't help one iota.
Because they only redistricted right around, they didn't let it, you're right, they didn't let it rip.
Which needs to do.
You close the meeting? Or this is something?
No.
No, it's closed for new development, still, because that's, quite the opposite.
Because we thought that, right, it's not Arundel a little bit, it would help us sever here, but they got
Cool down.
but it didn't help at all, not a bit.
It all depends, I guess, on the scale of the district.
And the Old Mill is not gonna help us at all.
I mean, it may.
Isn't that the adjacent district? I mean, there's a border between Mead and Old Mill, you just shifted.
Well, there's a border with Arundel too, the Severn,
But
Right
they didn't
there.
build a new high school.
no, but with Crofton. And the Arundel
Yeah.
border, you thought some of the Severn, it would loosen up with Severn, and it didn't help at all.
Yeah, but
So
that
you-
involves two changes as opposed to just one, so, and you were saying that.
So I
you were
have
saying
zero
that-
hope the Old Mill.
Anybody else?
Okay.
Up there? Now we can move to transportation.
Well, is that mine?
It could be. Did you write it?
What was every meeting there was, I think we need to add an incentive, add a, strategy that ensures that the county regulations are modified so that like missing mill or affordable housing can be provided, because there's so many things in the regulations that prevent,
Mhm.
like, forest conservation, it's really high. We can't meet densities now. If it's
Yeah.
R5, we don't get R5, we get R2.5 or something because of all the other things, open space, forest con. EDU calculations and costs and fees for everything prevent you from doing these things, but those would have to be changes in the code to really.
Yeah,
allow-
Jim had brought that up either in a meeting or you had emailed me afterwards. And we do have a strategy that talks about evaluating those forest conservation, it's the reforestation schedule, right?
It's not just that things.
Exactly, yeah.
I think very least probably speaking to like a broader.
Sure.
I am.
Right, but just saying that, like, we
Yeah.
acknowledge that, we do, clearly, if the goal is to provide more affordable housing or workforce housing. How do we incentivize it, loosen regulations? I think there's a toolbox.
Seen from the workforce housing discussion, that was like one of the key takeaways from both presenters was. Because their projects were a little bit older and they were meeting or having the same requirements that the projects for conservation. They were able to get the densities to make it work, but they saw challenges going forward.
Right, so regulations that provide incentives for greater densities or financial incentives that lessen impact fees for workforce housing connection fees. I think we have addressed those.
Didn't you hear of a strategy that says identify challenges of constructing this housing as redevelopment? So that, identifying the challenges should include the full list of all challenges, whether it's environmental.
And it's not just reading.
And it says including code requirements, so. I think you're pretty covered there, Marilyn.
And I think the one person that came and gave us the presentation about the senior and whatever on the same parcel.
Yes, we did write a strategy for that. To permit that without going through the subdivision process.
That thing as well about the density, and Mark brought that up too, about
Yeah.
the forest con not being able to meet that.
Yeah.
As well.
And again, these are some of the items that we're addressing in this document that we'll send out early next week, where some of these where these types of comments have come up. And we can point to some of those specific code sections like the reforestation schedule. Just so you see what it is and what could be in the future. Okay.
All right, so move on to transportation.
On the issue of walkable communities, I brought Plan 2040 with me and I just kind of skimmed through because it's pages and pages of those policies and strategies. There is a section about town centers that talks about walkability, but I don't know that we really stress it beyond town centers.
Sure, that's what I'm thinking, is if we can find these specific gaps in the language that we currently have and talk about where you're getting at, what the issue is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all housing should be to some extent walkable. So. Like, why not?
Yeah, I think that might depend on the density or the right.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can look into that. Okay, so that was housing. Ready to move on to the two transportation items. This one strategy is identify a dedicated funding stream. And I think this was the hot part here, was such as from real estate transfer taxes to expand and improve public transit. And one reason why we provided an example like this is because right now, to use the county public transportation, it's free. So we don't know how long, it's currently free. And I think the idea might be to continue it being free. But how do you support public transit in the future? And again, we just offered up real estate transfer taxes as an example. If that is too hot of a topic right now, we can certainly strike it to just read identify a dedicated funding stream to expand and improve public transit.
You may want to change it to identify dedicated funding streams because you may have to cobble together multiples.
So if we were to take out such as from real estate transfer taxes, does that read better? And just leave it, don't provide an example, just leave it wide open, right?
That's why they get the big bucks.
That's
Yes, okay.
okay. Good. Strategy 16, revise the zoning ordinance to update bicycle parking requirements countywide. So right now there are bicycle parking requirements in these sections here in the first bullet under background. So town centers, PUDs, commercial revitalization districts, mixed use developments. So we do have certain metrics or requirements for the number of bicycle parking spaces. But again, the idea here with this is to look broader or into other areas other than those town centers, planned unit developments like Russet as an example, commercial revitalization districts and mixed use developments. And just to recap, there were 7 folks who said, I like it. 1 that said, disagree, but I trust the group. And 4 that said, needs more discussion. This one fell at 66.66. So just wanted to bring it in here.
I think the
problem is, once you put in the zoning ordinance, there's no flexibility in it, and it really should be on a project by project basis. So you could be requiring bicycles where it just doesn't make sense.
I think that's, I made a comment there just to determine the actual needs first.
Mhm.
Evaluate them before evaluate.
Okay. Right, and when we say something like revise the zoning ordinance, and I know we have countywide here at the end of this statement. Revising it would take into account some type of study, but point taken, we can certainly add, evaluate and revise so that it's not saying that we would require bicycle parking requirements in our least dense zoning district, right, in our rural areas where it may not make sense to have bicycle parking. So, Jim, are you proposing, say, evaluate and revise, or?
Yeah, maybe it would be evaluate and revise.
But it's not just the zoning, it's the uses too, so that's where
Okay,
there needs to be flexibility. I mean, when things go in the code, there is no flexibility.
are you allowed to
I'm not
apply for a
against
modification?
bicycles or anything,
But
Not zoning. No.
but the bicycle parking is in the landscape manual, right?
No.
Yeah, it is. It's under the streetscape and urban standards.
But not for the countywide. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's where the background information is pulled from. It's from the landscape manual. The code may reference using the landscape manual.
So this would be
But-
required for neighborhood developments? Or are we talking commercial? So for commercial, I could see this, but why would it be necessary? For planned use developments?
For planned unit developments, you may want to have some type of bicycle parking if you have trails within the community so people can park their bikes.
And you'd want them in apartment buildings and higher density residential. You'd also
Right.
want-
Right, I can see that for higher use, like
Yeah.
where I live. It's not necessary.
Yeah, single family housing, certainly. This would not.
And it's 47 houses and there's nowhere that it's really needed.
Sure.
We don't even
Right,
have a
and
sidewalk.
I think the point of adding the term evaluate sort of helps during the implementation phase where we would say, okay, we need to study and what makes the most sense, what types of uses, what type of density, any specific other geographies or designations like the commercial revitalization district, if you can tie it to that. That's really our first step, is evaluating and seeing where it makes the most sense. And I'll also say too, is when any of these potential ordinances are drafted, they go to county council and there is a public testimony opportunity, or an opportunity for public testimony. So before any of this does become law or becomes a requirement, there is the opportunity for the public to participate in that process.
But in terms of like architectural guidelines for the new developments and that kind of stuff. How would they be bound by whatever gets put in place?
These would be amendments to the code.
But that's what I'm saying, like a single family development. We can't say that all single families need to have it, because like mine, there's no need for it. But like Russet,
Are you talking about architectural or bicycle parking?
the bicycle parking, that's what I'm
Okay.
saying, like mine, it's not needed.
Right, so we would, when we develop a bill for county council to adopt, we would be doing this type of discussion or research within OPZ and talking to various departments about what makes the most sense. Where,
Just say research, evaluate, and revise the zoning ordinance, would that just clear up everything?
But it doesn't even have to be in the zoning ordinance, so I guess that's my point. It could be in the subdivision regulations or something that's more flexible. Zoning does
So-
have car parking, and I guess that's why you're saying bicycle parking and zoning.
So we can take out the word zoning ordinance and just say the code. So revise the code.
So
For the
what you're
landscape
saying-
manual.
But you're saying that bicycle parking is required only in town centers, plan use, except
Right.
where is that required? Is it in zoning?
It's within the landscape manual, which is referenced by the zoning ordinance
Okay.
to follow the recommendations in the landscape
Okay,
manual.
but I mean, my understanding, and I completely
Yeah.
agree with the idea, is that instead of only requiring bicycles in these very limited districts, it's expanding into other districts. But not to the entire county.
Right, it's not a
even
blanket,
Requiring them in single family, R1
Right.
zones.
right,
Okay,
Typically, for bicycle parking, you don't require it in residential. You want to see it at transit stops, you want to see it at office buildings and places where there's a lot of employment for people. Where people may ride their bike to work. Those are the areas, so.
But
I don't know,
this
Mark.
is how ridiculous it gets, mixed use, you do end up requiring it, and. You have all kind of uses, this is where I go to the point, it depends on what you're doing. Self-storage, required to put bicycle out. Nobody drives a bike to self-storage. Because you're unpacking or packing things. It's that kind of thing where it's the use and what you're actually doing, like you said, commercial areas, retail, all that should have bicycles.
but there might be an employee or employees that use some of
Well,
these
okay.
facilities.
A self-storage user, unfortunately, and there's only one employee that works there,
Yeah.
and she drives to Volkswagen. I see it in the parking lot every time I'm in there. I mean, generally, I would agree with you, Marilee, in a self-storage, you don't need bike parking. It doesn't necessarily work. I think I hear everybody's concerns. I think it's a little, the fact that we have bike parking requirements in the landscape manual, which is referenced through the zoning code. I mean, maybe we would do something different in the future. So I think you want to maybe take all the detail out of this and come up with a more general recommendation. The other thing is countywide. I mean, you're probably not going to put it in residential districts. You're not going to put it in rural districts. But you would want to expand beyond, let's say, just town centers.
So how about something like research, evaluate, and revise the bicycle parking ordinance?
There's no
Or even
word.
bicycle parking requirements.
Requirement.
Just go more vague on this one.
Research, evaluate, and revise the bicycle parking requirement.
And, okay, so do we want to say something about to ensure it's provided?
No, I just leave it at that.
Well, to tie it to use is that you need it.
Maybe you need things stored.
Although if you're evaluating it, typically you're gonna figure out if you need it in the evaluation, so.
This is one of those things we would put in for developments as an amenity,
right.
maybe the difference maker between
Mhm.
if Jim was an office developer. Maybe I put it in if Parchment wanted that or used it.
Yeah,
Would
if they weren't gonna
BBC
get killed on the roads that lead to your places, I
Well,
mean,
we even have a hiker biker trail in our area.
okay.
And it will, because we own 500 acres and it helps tie things in and some people use it, but. I like having it as an amenity, and it's a difference maker for us. And if you're a tenant, maybe you choose to look at us over Jim's office development group because.
Your employees are gonna be healthier if they're biking to work.
Well, right, but
It's like your
oftentimes,
health insurance.
but as an example, USGBC, we follow lead and they will practice, and they tell you to put in so many of these. We're like, you put them in to be good stewards and nobody uses them. It just, so I like having the flexibility of what we do put in. Sometimes we'll put in a bike room. And as an amenity, you can come in, ride a bike over lunch, return it, at no cost. But I just don't like having the gun to our head saying what we have to do, particularly because it's senseless to build stuff that people don't utilize. Kind of like the swimming pool in the apartment. You rent the place, it's gotta have one to check the box, and then nobody uses them, you know?
And the maintenance is ridiculous.
Right, it just, so some of these things don't make sense, and I personally believe it should be incumbent on the developer to provide it if it's an amenity to them, if their tenants want it. If their tenants really want it, and you don't have it, they won't come to our developments. So we'll have to provide it.
I think the other thing to think about too is this is a long range plan. This is 10 years and gas prices, what could happen in the future. You've got your hiker biker trail, and now some people are saying maybe it's just cheaper if I ride my bike to work.
We've been doing
And
this
that-
for 15
yeah.
years. And in providing, I said, how long lead has been around,
Mhm.
that we've been implementing this. So we got a 15-year track record that we can look at. That's just as long as we're gonna go to the 2040 plan.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't really taken off.
Yeah, but they're putting more and more bike lanes in.
There are,
You know, and,
yeah,
you know, right now, 175 is pretty ridiculous, it's all broken up, but the idea is you build it and they will come. You know, and you have a fully developed bike.
it's, I love the idea. Are you getting the bang for the buck for it? though?
Right.
And to your point, it's gotta be fully built out so you can access it from a public road. I get it.
Yep.
I love the idea. I love the opportunity to bike, but it's just. In our developments, it doesn't happen. It's very commercial based, obviously.
So Mark, what was the language again that you kind of dialed back to?
So we had research, evaluate, and revise the bicycle parking requirements.
Yeah.
And again, it's really just to get this process started, right? Exactly.
Just like you told me, earlier, this is
Yep.
recommendations for
Yep.
them, love our pay grade and make
Yep.
the big bucks.
Yeah. So once this does get adopted, we'll have then annual reports that report on the progress of these strategies in the future. So. Okay, and then the last one was, again, just going back to the opportunity for you all to provide additional comments or feedback on strategies that weren't already included in the Survey Monkey, as well as then Plan 2040. So another comment here on better use and tracking of impact fees. And is there a strategy in here? I don't want to interpret too much from without having the discussion, so I do want to open that up.
I think the strategy is that impact fees need to be reevaluated as to their purpose and limit.
A geographical area of where they're collected and how they're spent.
Amen, because let me tell you,
Yeah.
all the development that has been done in West County and all these impact fees, like when it's development. And the other one that was just on Rock Bridge, I haven't seen jack from these impact fees that have been collected. Like he built that nice little lane that goes for 2/3 of a mile. And that's all I saw. And I know he paid a crap ton of money and he put that addition on the school. But you know what I'm saying, like, and the development on Rock Bridge, we didn't get squat from those impact fees. Except that they had to repave the road because they tore it up.
So there's a couple of problems with impact fees. One, there are too many groups, so the money's in little pockets and they don't like end up with enough money to, do a big improvement. Whereas if you had a bigger geographic area for the money, you have bigger pots to do bigger improvements. The other is, there was some legislation changed a couple years ago where it does allow them to use impact fee money for like studies and paying for certain people. I can't remember exactly. So that's not even going to capacity, that's going to these other things. So you're losing that money for that.
We've seen more from the racetrack impact fees than we have from anything else in our area, which is ridiculous.
So, one of the things I do is I look at the impact fee eligibility list for the budget office. And I was looking at it today because it's due to them on the 18th of January. And actually, there's a memo from 2013 that identifies how we can determine which projects are eligible. And it doesn't say that studies can be used, and there are some studies on the list today that I was like, not eligible.
They changed the code like 2 years ago.
Coaching.
Yeah,
Alright, I'll go back and look at that.
and it shouldn't have happened because, right, that's money that should be used for capacity and it's not.
Well, because the other thing is you can study something and determine that it is not going to increase capacity, so you should not then be able to turn around and use the money for a study that ultimately is a project that's not gonna add capacity.
They started a study on impact, studying impact fees.
Yeah, what's the impact?
Well, so on the tracking of impact fees, there is an impact fee report that does come out annually, so we do track it. But maybe the second sentence about revising how they can be used to efficiently provide improvements, I mean, maybe that's something you wanna latch onto. I'll go back and look at the changes.
Yeah, we'll address this one in 2 weeks. We'll get some more information, see if there's any gaps in Plan 2040 and see if we need a new strategy for this.
So you keep referring to Plan 2040, so what's happening then? Are we adding strategies? What's in 2040? Is
Right.
that what's happening?
Correct.
Under the auspices of the original goals, correct?
Yes, we'll have goals that these strategies will be underneath. Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
like,
and they
more
might-
detail on your regional area.
Right.
It's like a drill down. right?
This is a
Exactly.
drill down.
Yeah.
But then we can also implement or make recommendations that won't necessarily. in Plan 2040
Correct.
as well.
Yeah.
The code was amended with Plan 2040 to say that the region plans amend Plan 2040. Okay, so these will essentially supersede, like, for instance, when you guys get into land use and zoning. Now, Plan 2040 doesn't include any zoning, but it does include land use. So changes in land use being made now or recommended to the county council for approval and adoption. Those changes will amend Plan 2040. And that language is in 18.3 or 18.2.103. Significantly enhanced through the Plan 2040 legislative process.
So I also have 2 other questions.
Mhm.
If there were comments on other strategies that we didn't talk about tonight, and you said you were gonna provide that, I guess,
Mhm.
next week, are we going to be able to discuss some of those? I feel like there were questions that I had and things, and you said other people had questions, but I feel like we're never gonna talk about them.
Right, because we've come to consensus through.
How do we know if people had comments? I mean, I know they picked one of those categories that we
Mhm.
had to, but should we still discuss them? Maybe we would make the strategy better.
We'll take some of those comments into consideration. But again, because there are several steps at this process, we just want to get to the point where are these strategies at a good point to go out to the public for review? They'll go out to the public for review, the public will provide some additional comments. We'll come back and we can talk about those comments and those strategies and see if additional tweaks need to be made.
Will this group review the public comment?
Yes, yeah, and you all individually are members of the public, you can certainly, when these strategies go live for public comment, you can log on as yourself and make your own comments. So.
All right, so we've
Yep.
done the initial part of the agenda, and I know we can really dive into some of the, or at least get started on the others. We haven't done the surveys on the other ones yet, so I think we should take. Things are around 7:30-ish. We said we go till about 8, so I would say why don't we get started and then we can, and then about 8 o'clock maybe check in and see.
We have the room till about 8:30, 8:45.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, what are we going to start on?
Yeah, so the deadline for the transportation and housing was earlier this week.
Right.
I've recently sent out 5 more surveys for the 5 additional topics. That's currently open until January 13th, next Friday morning. Nobody has gone in there and provided any comments, so we can start together as a group and go through each strategy. And then I can remove those strategies from the survey and your homework just got a little bit less.
So that's a question. So yeah, so the truth is that we kind of did part 1 today because honestly, you all did a great job of doing it.
Yeah.
So that's great. Actually, so it's like we can either, you know, recess and adjourn
Yeah,
and go home.
Right,
Or we can get started on the work we need to have done before the 19th. So the idea being just how folks feel, and I just thought since we did such a great job and we're a little ahead of schedule. And that's why I was kind of proposing we could get started and then about 8 o'clock, see where we're at, and if folks want to then adjourn, or we can adjourn now. I just didn't know if folks would rather do it at home and look at it and take the time, or if we'd like to do it together and get a head start.
Well, if we do it together, it addresses Marilee's issue about comments being
Yep.
glossed over. I feel the same way. I had a few comments that, you know, I guess we'll talk about later, but yeah, I'd like to get going. Thank you.
Okay, all right, yeah.
you want to just roll right into
Yeah.
it, skip a break? Okay. I'll come back to this slide for next steps. And so kicking off with land use and zoning, the first strategy is again, revising zoning regulations, greater flexibility and redevelopment of small sites, small properties, while meeting the vision of the region. So again, this was something that we had heard about through our meetings, where it's just really difficult to develop small sites. And so how can we again provide flexibility for some of those bulk regulations?
That's what I would say, it's not just small sites, it's hard to redevelop in general.
So how do you want to characterize that more? Because at a certain point, it just becomes so general that it's like create flexibility for any redevelopment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
it's all.
Do you have any specific examples of what flexibility items might need to be addressed?
One of the things you have up there, setbacks, open space, forest conservation.
Just thinking process, I don't know, once you get thought about, would it be? Maybe take the strategy and put it in a Google Doc and then.
Yeah, why don't, so what if we take a 5-minute break? We can get that set up
Yeah,
and then we
exactly.
can do some of these edits
Because I
on the
know that
fly.
worked well last time, and we just were working on it together and making the changes, and we
Yep.
kind of all see it. So
Can we
yeah,
take
okay.
5?
Yeah, so let's take a
Okay.
5-minute break, and then now we will be able to kind of come back and look at it. Okay.
That's everybody.
Reporting, hi Kimmy, thanks for Kimmy is joining us. Here up. So we've moved the next set of strategies to a Google Doc, so that way as we're having these conversations, we can kind of revise them, or if we're not making revisions, but have comments like you would have at home, we'll add it here, so. Sorry to stop the conversation that we were having, so we can pick up with number 1 again, and you know, like I said, make live edits to it, or if you don't have an edit, but you just want to have a comment, you can have that.
Okay, so let me go back to Marilee, revise zoning regulations to provide greater flexibility. Do you want to keep in redevelopment sites? Or just take out, or to provide greater flexibility?
And not with redevelopment, you're saying?
The focus there was redevelopment, so.
Yeah,
Just
I would say
Right.
flexibility with redevelopment.
Redevelopment is challenged, so
Okay,
creating flexibility, it's all redevelopment or infill. Would you
Okay.
add an infill to that?
That's falls under redevelopment in my mind.
Infill does?
Take out small sites. Yes, I would.
So I was instructed by the county attorney that we don't actually have regulations in Anne Arundel County, like our code. We call it a code or we call it an ordinance. We don't call it regulations. Every place else I've worked, I've called it regulations. May want to broaden this to say not all, I would say zoning code, but you may also
Just
say
say
the development code, which is Article 17.
Yeah, why can't you just say revised codes?
Well, you could do that too.
Makes it broad enough, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because who knows which one you're gonna ride.
Revise the county code.
To what end? Is my question, to increase profits? Or to encourage missing middle housing, affordable housing? That sort of thing. I mean, because I don't want to just say, hey, just throw out all the regulations. Because we're there for a reason. We need to have a reason for requesting this.
Well,
To encourage redevelopment, though, right, on infill sites that are maybe
Okay.
dilapidated or whatever.
That's what I'm saying.
It's not redevelopment. Right?
Yeah,
like an
but
old strip center that's underutilized and, prime for redevelopment.
okay. I think we need to say something like that. What are the goals? The goals are revitalization, encourage infill housing. etc.
So let me go back to our vision, because we do add that point in that strategy.
Revitalize commercial.
And so
Yeah. But I think we need to make it clear what our goals for this vision of the code is.
Even with the wording of the vision, meaning the vision.
It's a capital V vision for
Right,
vision statement. So Kevin, you're saying you would like it specifically also to have a few goals, just to reemphasize. Beyond the vision of the region.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm afraid people are gonna look at this and say, oh, so we want to make it more profitable for developers.
So do you want some parentheses there to state a couple of things?
yeah, I think that's what Kevin's trying to say.
Redevelopment in the areas of, and then we could list some. Maybe.
Or, yeah, if you.
Those areas may change.
well, why is while meeting the vision not satisfying? Because that's what it said.
Or back to the actual beach.
And he was just,
No, it's that
Do you want to-
revitalization.
Can you guys give some concrete examples of what you think flexibility would be? Just out of curiosity.
it's those things that are already up there. Setbacks, open space. We've talked about forest
I was
conservation.
just saying, we want to. We keep talking about forest conservation, so that's, yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to develop in green areas, right? Or
It's always easier to develop these green areas. It is.
Well, that's the vision, right? Let's try to encourage development on these previously utilized sites.
Yes.
So Spencer, those are all in the
Yes.
sentence below.
What do you say?
Those are all in the sentence below.
I think that's my right.
yeah, so in the green, that's me tracking a change here. And I would then strike this.
No, I think you guys want to keep density allowances setbacks open, so it's like, it was keeping that and adding forest,
You can put reforestation in the sentence below.
yeah, that's.
Okay.
Just add reforestation in between one of those other words.
Setbacks, open space.
Right.
But I wouldn't put reforestation first. Put density first. Put it in front of open space.
Okay.
Okay, well, leading the vision for the region. Okay. I guess. That's why we're doing this.
Correct. So we're referring back to the vision statement, which references the mixed use.
Yeah.
Affordable, and then whatever that other sentence was in there related to, a workforce housing,
Yeah, revitalization.
correct?
We have consensus.
Then the second strategy. Since we heard a lot about childcare, this one is trying to, this is one of those strategies that's trying to address reducing barriers or encouraging the ability for more childcare centers.
So is this the same like revised county code?
Yeah, I think we need the same language.
So in that county code changes.
Do you want to just go revise?
Okay.
So say be established.
Yeah, that's why it's
Yeah,
catching.
That's why it's.
Yeah,
Be established. True.
And these words always sort of get me when you just say small, like what does small mean?
sure.
Well, home-based childcare. That does sound small.
That
Well,
is,
okay,
it's a
but-
conditional use, right, is what we found in the code, so it does actually identify.
Conditions don't have to do that.
It's a
I-
home occupation. It's considered a home occupation. There's,
Is it size or is it number of children you can have in the? Yeah,
Usually for
Size, number of
Yeah.
children, they're not
Right.
really sure.
so if we take out small, I hear you. Home-based is rooted in the code, so that we can always go back to that, so. So I think that is a little more specific.
When you're saying non-residential, appropriate non-residential categories, what would be an example? I'm from my own education.
Yeah,
Because if it's home based, how is it?
Can't have
not?
home based if not
No.
residential.
well,
Yeah, I guess so much.
it would, I think we see this as one part and then appropriate non-residential zoning categories.
or residential that could be.
So that would be like
commercial.
when you have like a child time that's in an office park, that would be like a non-residential.
Yeah. Strategy 3.
But that's not what that's saying though, because it's saying home-based children centers in all residential and appropriate non-residential.
No, but I think that's the.
It's specific, right, because we recognize that could be something that may need to be changed again. To help facilitate more of these childcare centers. So,
And I think one of the barriers is that. We don't want to have additional regulations at the local level because home-based childcare centers would have to be licensed at the state level.
mhm,
So we don't want to have additional county requirements on top of that.
Hey Spencer, when you looked at this in 1810, do you remember what the name of it was exactly? Because I've gone through this now once and I haven't found it. Well, that's where the conditional uses are.
So it's a home occupation.
Oh,
Instead of a home occupation, it's not resident. It's the type of home occupation.
yeah, I'm there, okay.
So I still don't understand the non-residential zoning.
I guess some residential can be, and like we can allow, some commercial allows for some residential. And I think that's just what we're getting at, or like workforce housing. Technically could happen in a W, industrial.
So that's what they're
Mhm.
trying to
Yeah,
cover.
just
Right.
covering that too.
Residential uses in non-residential zone.
mhm.
Now, would the revision of that code be something that would override restrictions on those types of businesses and planned communities, places with covenants?
Trying to think how we've dealt with. So for example, Russet may have a covenant that says you cannot have a home occupation
Where it says no daycare center.
No. within your home.
Within,
Yeah.
yes.
Christina,
So
do you
that-
know?
So that is you know, that's your own,
Yeah.
community association or HOA putting restrictions. That
Yeah.
happens a lot of times in communities that have them.
But what about like, say, the right to charge bill, where it came and they said now the HOA cannot make a restriction bar anymore from charging, but they can regulate that, so. It would, one of those revisions be to where it's telling planned communities you can't restrict someone?
I don't think so. I think your HOA would still prevail, your covenants would still,
If you're out, shut it down.
Right.
Done it.
Yeah.
State HOA, state HOA.
yeah.
Because honestly, the county code on home occupation and what it says. So it shall be located and conducted entirely in a principal dwelling, so you can't do it in a detached garage. May not change the character of the dwelling, so let's say you put a big expansion to do your daycare, it can't end up looking like this giant protrusion that is out of character for the neighborhood. It cannot exceed 25% of the total floor area of the home. And then, as far as childcare, it's for a maximum of 12 children in accordance with the requirements of the state child care administration. I don't think our code language is that restrictive for childcare. I don't. As a home occupation, now maybe, and that would be in a residential district. So if you want to look at it outside of residential. That's because I think I heard somebody say something about, like office uses where typical or commercial uses where typically it might not be permitted, but you want it to be permitted. That could be somewhere to look at it. Pardon?
That's driving.
Yeah. See, I don't think you need to do it in residential, but maybe you do need to do it in mixed use and office and other appropriate commercial locations.
We just don't leave it as like a catch on.
I'm fine with number 3.
We're on 2 still, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. That was my OCD catching something that was red. I apologize. Okay, so we're good with 2? Okay, sorry. Yep. Strategy 3. I heard Nicole's good with it. Everybody, okay? Okay, 4.
What's natural features again, is that?
Yeah.
What is the features?
We do, yeah.
Steep slopes, wetland, stream buffers,
Stream buffers is included.
but I mean, that's all regulated. What are you trying to get out of this?
There's a county landscape,
You
native
have a
species.
manual for that, right?
We do. Yep.
It's already
Is it-
regulated.
So,
So what is what needs to be reviewed and updated?
so again, these issues could have come from our discussions here or from public comment. So folks feel, a member of the public may have felt that there needs to be an update to this to have, expand the wetland buffer or stream buffer, for example.
Or maybe they wanted the native species to be
Right.
replanted versus other things.
Although if you're replanting,
So-
you are planting native, that's
Right.
required now.
So,
I'm not sure.
So this really starts with the review.
can we delete this if we feel this is a new?
If-
point?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, can we strike this?
sure. Okay.
That is a lot.
That is- Okay.
What's the displacement for residents? Development, where, how's that?
Is that how?
I'm just like,
Again, 10-year plan, we're coming up with planned land use and zoning changes as part of this. And if there is, some unintended consequence where there is gentrification or folks are displaced as a result, then this is trying to.
Potential gentrification of existing neighborhoods and displacement of residents, period. I mean, they could be displaced for any reason, right?
No, I think, no, I think it should stay in redevelopment, redo redevelopment, because that is what causes a lot of the gentrification of existing.
Property taxes.
Yeah, with property taxes.
Redevelopment?
When you redevelop, the property taxes go up a lot of times.
The
And then people
gentrification.
that live there can't afford to live there.
Yes,
It can
because
also happen because of development. Like coming to.
My property tax just went up $4,000
Yep.
over the next 3 years.
Oh my goodness.
what's that?
Serious?
And your house is only 3 years old.
Is that due to gentrification?
No, but my house is 3 years old and it just went up 4K over the next 3 years. So.
In value or your tax?
My property taxes, my.
Well, it's based on the value, right?
No. But the thing is, your taxes won't go up because of your homestead.
No, they still go up even if you hope.
I mean, at this point, my house is.
Yeah, my house is brand, he just built it.
Yes, but at this point, my house is worth, it's been assessed at almost $500,000. But I pay on $220,000.
Some people are way below.
Because of the homesteaders. Exemption.
But it's-
You're not allowed to increase it by more than a certain percentage every year.
Right.
That's it. And after 32 years. I brag about how little I pay in taxes. Because the homeowner property tax credit is significant. I don't understand why we need to say something about something that's already a great program. No, true.
It's an additional local resource for homeowners on fixed income.
Right.
Yes, if you have a 90-year-old
Okay, so this is
single
different.
woman
from what
who's
I'm
been in the
talking
same
about.
house for 50 years, it's a way to ensure that a $4,000 tax bill doesn't force her to.
I think you're okay to count this.
Yeah,
Okay, so the homeowner's property tax credit is separate from the
The
homestead.
Head.
Yeah, seriously?
which is the federal. Parts.
No, it's state. It's a county. These are both county programs. then?
No, the homestead is the state
State.
program.
State.
You have to apply at the state level.
Okay, with number 5?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop. So this is a designation through the state to provide additional resources for redevelopment to help facilitate that. And align with the county's development policy area. This is something we touched on during that boot camp that we had. And it's just a designation to indicate that there's this policy that we identify that there's a transit station here. And this is where we want additional growth to happen to help support ridership and alternative modes of transportation. So if you want, I can add in here county's transit-oriented development policy overlay. If that's just to help.
But if you look at the state.
Okay, so
Are you, what is, I don't understand what you're saying here. Are we supporting it and changing it to a transit oriented development?
no, so the county has we have our own development policy areas, right? And so what we're saying is align, maybe I need to say boundary somewhere,
Say that we agree and we want some state money.
resources,
We're
yeah.
trying to Pursue state money for this too.
So it's already in the transit oriented, we just want to.
The county's transit oriented
Right.
development policy area overlay. It would still need the state's approval of this transit oriented development designation to,
Get some state dollars.
exactly.
Those state dollars apply specifically to Amarillo County? Or could, I just remember we got off the bus. I looked at
Yeah.
everyone on the county side. and
Yeah.
Oh,
You turn around and you look at Howard County side.
so,
It was exactly what we would want on our side. I just wouldn't want us lobbying for money to go to Howard
Yeah.
County and improvements over there. You
yeah,
want that like the impact fee, you want that dedicated to our area.
the state may, when they look at this site, they may look to expand it to see what makes sense to include within that designation. They're allowed up to a half mile from the transit station.
In any direction.
Yeah, regardless, I think regardless of the county boundaries, municipal boundaries. So,
I mean, investment there is still a good thing.
Yeah.
Because rising tide raises all
Yeah.
boats, right?
Yeah.
In theory. Doesn't hurt.
okay.
Okay.
Okay with that one? So those were the 6 for land use and zoning, because if you do look at Plan 2040, we have quite a few. So again, these were just the ones that we identified that need to go a little bit further for the region, or that weren't already addressed in Plan 2040. Any additional land use and zoning strategies? And what I can do is, we've gone through these 6. In the survey, I'll take these out, but I'll still leave this box if you guys still want to think about it over the next week and plug anything else in. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I would say we did extra credit, which is great. So we did a few more push-ups than we thought we would, so that's great. So I would say, if it's okay with everybody, we can then move on and have Mark do his next steps.
Yeah.
And then move to kind of adjourn, since we're getting close to 8:30 anyway, but at least we've knocked out one of the piece, so it takes a little bit of work out. So that work. Okay, great. So Mark,
Okay, so I just wanted to list out who's doing what over the next couple weeks. So our team, Office Planning and Zoning, like I said, is we want to address those comments from the housing and transportation strategies. We'll send that to you early next week. And we'll review the strategy changes that we just talked about here. Some we did have consensus on, some we said, hey, we need to do a little bit more research, or we want to tweak the language. And we'll come back to you again in 2 weeks. So we'll present what those final draft strategies might look like, and we can talk about that.
Are you saying you're talking to other departments before that?
Yeah, we may need to talk to ACDS or others within Office Planning and Zoning, just to have them vet these strategies. Okay. Your homework over the next 2 weeks. This first one is over the next week. I'm sorry, let me back up. Yeah, so when we send out the responses, take a look at those over the next 2 weeks. And again, we've reached consensus. We really don't want to go back and have to, belabor those. But if something is so glaring, we can bring it up again. So just take a look at that when we do send that out. Then the second bullet here is what's due next Friday morning at 8 a.m. is to complete the strategy surveys for cultural resources, economy, natural environment, rec and parks, healthy communities. I'll leave that one open-ended comment box for land use and zoning in case you have any other strategies or comments for ones that weren't included already. And I'll send out friendly reminders over the next week for you all to take those surveys. And then again, we're meeting in 2 weeks here at the Severn Library at 6:15 to start up with cultural resources. And again, based on how much consensus we have from these survey results, I'll keep plugging them in and we can continue to roll through them like we did tonight. Okay.
great.
Anything else? Yeah.
All right, any public comment?
The design guideline topic you guys had spent some talking. I saw it a little differently. I mean, what I've seen is, if I travel, I think I said this the last time. If you travel over here to Severn and see developments that are, apartment buildings and whatnot, but I see a community, because I wouldn't mind living there. I see developments going in and Jessup, there's packed with people there. And I think trying to come up with guidelines to talk about what the community, what should the kids and the families experience and experience in their community is something that, you know, you want to talk about color of siding and color of roof, but what is it going to be like? What are they going to have there to enjoy their life? And so I think those are the kind of guidelines I think we could go a long way. And I think we could took a ride about 5 miles to the west, you would see a lot of what I think would appeal to a lot of people in the Columbia area. They have a lot of the amenities, they have trees, they have paths, they have a lot of stuff that I think we ought to strive in Hamilton County to put in our guidelines. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at. I also hear words of incentives. That's been talked about over and over again. And I would say if you want to go down that path, then you need to establish a way to model the cost. And there's tools out there to do that. But until you start understanding what the costs are and what is reasonable incentives, if you're shooting in the dark. So I think that's something that ought to be raised. And the other thing is, I hear, you know, we've got to have, I mean, one topic is, you know, affordable house. Well, we have police that need it, we have teachers, we have fire, county employees, we all agree upon that. So do you hand the money over to the developer to build the building? Or maybe you want to pay those employees more money so they have a choice of where they live and what their community and what's the house look like. But there's two ways to approach it. Either you put up all these incentives and all these handouts, or you pay the people a salary where they can afford to live in the community. So you know, from what we've seen here in the development here in Jessup versus development, Arundel Mills and the Parkway, high density development does not translate into lower cost housing. And you can improve that for yourself by checking the prices of units in Jessup versus units up at the 20-story building in Arundel Mills. So that's all.
All right, well, with that, have a motion to adjourn. Nicole, and second by Thomas. No objections. All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for sticking around a little longer, getting a little more done. Perfect. Everybody.